Hello, hello, hello. Welcome back. It's all about the monsters today. And we're going to delve into an undead monster, a creature of the night, a creature that is dead or undead or just a former shadow of itself. Yes, the shadow. This is all part of me going through all the monsters for Dungeons and Dragons 5e and making some adjustments to them because they don't always sort of work the way I think they should. So I think they need to be worked on. I'm going to put up a poll. Feel free to take part in that poll. Feel free to share your ideas and thoughts on what needs to be changed. I'm going to get into this fairly quickly. I have changed a little bit of what I do here. I have a table that is not formal that I have developed while I was on a holiday, and I will share it with you in the chat, but I probably will not share it outside of the chat. Not for now. Anyway, let's get started, shall we? Grab some food, some drink, and get ready. Hi, welcome to How to RPG. My name is Fred Weller, and today I want to talk about how to fix or remaster the Shadow stat block for Dungeons & Dragons 5e, the undead creature. This thing is actually pretty well designed. It does most of the things you need it to do or want it to do. And now it's just about making sure that it's lined up with what we're trying to achieve. Like, what are we trying to achieve? We're trying to duplicate something that's been done in the past. So what I'm going to do is I've got a Google document. I'm going to go through it. I'm going to do all the maths for it. I also have a chart that is not a chart that you can access because only I have that chart for adjusting the monsters. It is based on the Dungeon Master Guide for 2014 with some very heavy adjustments. I will warn you now. I do not want to make it available because I do not know if the mathematics is correct yet, because this needs to be based off a couple of different things, and unless I have all the information, which I do not at this present time, I can't figure things out. And even if you have maths doesn't solve the problem of play testing. You still have to play test the newer stuff, classes and species and backgrounds, and you still have to play test all that stuff, and you need to play test it with the monsters that you have to see where things sit. And you have to play test. Unfortunately, play testing needs to be done by people who are skilled and experienced in the system. And I feel like the system right now for D&D 5e, where we've got 12 years behind that. That's fine. But the new version of the game, we don't, because a lot of that stuff will not be play tested particularly well. So it's a lot harder to actually gauge whether we've got something right or wrong with that. So that is one of our issues. So here is the stat block in my Google document. There's a couple of things that I will point out here, and I will refer to my table that I have. We're going to go and do the numbers first, and then we'll go back and we'll have a look at all of the different features to make sure they're doing what we need them to do. Okay, so let's start off with the basics. Armor class. Now this is a challenge rating half monster. I don't know that it should be a challenge rating half monster. Proficiency bonus of +2, that's pretty obvious. Now, armor class. Are we sitting in the right place for this? This is a table I have made up. So you can see it says down the side here on the left, challenge rating half, proficiency bonus 2, armor class 12. Now we can be 1 or 2 points up or down from that. So it could be an 11, could be a 13, and we'd still be all right. But we shouldn't really be any more than 1 point outside of that range, okay? And that's the same thing with everything else in these columns, to a certain degree, at least until we get to the number of attacks. With the number of attacks, it's a different story, and even damage per attack. So armor class is fine. Number of hit points, maximum hit points, 50 to 70. Now this may not be right as a range because I haven't had a chance to see how much damage a monster can do in terms of a half challenge rating. Well, not so much the monsters, but the player characters, because a half challenge rating suggests that it should be not a challenge for a level 1 character, right? So it shouldn't be a challenge for them. So this number might not be right. but the +4 is fine, okay, because it should be not on par with a player character. That would be a challenge rating 1. So it should be not hitting as much. Most characters will have a +5 at level 1. This is going to get a +4. That's all right. That's fine. Okay, so let's have a look at our number of hit points. You can see it's not very good, so we're going to make some adjustments to this. It's not sitting in the range. Again, this is not all finalized yet. These are my best guess in calculations. Thank you, Jasper, who is a patron, who was helping me do the maths during my holiday. Okay, so we need to adjust this. Now, the top end is the thing I'm worried about. I'm not worried about the average, okay? The top end for the existing one is 27, and it goes to 16 as the average. It's the top end. I need to get into at least the 50 range. That's what we want to hit. Okay, so let's do that first. So 3 is probably not enough. Let's make it 4 and see if we get close enough. Actually, it would need to be 6, wouldn't it, to get into the right range. So 6 times 8, and if we got 6 dice and we're adding, so it'll be 6 times the modifier, the con modifier, so it'll be another 6. Gives me 54, which is probably where we need to sit. I don't think that we can go any lower than that. So this is going to be a 6. 6 8-sided dice, and this will be a bonus of 6 to add to it, giving us a grand total, as you can see, of 54. Now you might be thinking, Fred, this is ridiculous. 54 hit points, and if the players are level 1 and this is challenge rating half, here's the thing. You would probably only use 1 or 2 shadows when they're level 1. Like 2 shadows would be a tough fight for level 1 characters. How long will they last? This monster here was probably, if you use maximum hit points and you're dealing with really experienced people, would probably, one of them would last probably about a round and a half. You get 3 rounds, hopefully, but no guarantees. Hopefully, if you're dealing with somebody who's experienced and they're level 1. But if they've got a paladin, it changes everything. Okay, and if they have somebody who's like a cleric and they can turn undead, that would change things again. You're not really going to have turn undead usually straight out the bat, or not necessarily find that it's successful. But anyway, there we go. Let's do this. So now the average is 4.5 for an 8-sided dice. Multiply that by 6. And then we add the 6. And our average is 33. So anywhere between there. If you're dealing with new people who are not skilled in the system, use 33. If you've got somebody or group like my own who are very, very skilled, you'd use 54. And that should be pretty much where we need to be. So undo that. The speed I have no problems with. I honestly don't think we need to worry about any of the attribute or ability scores or modifiers, because we're dealing with something that is not necessarily supposed to be a on par with player characters. I don't think we need to worry about having +3s anywhere for dexterity or anything else. So don't worry about any of that. Okay, so just forget about that stuff. Next, stealth. Now stealth, it's proficient obviously, stealth +4, which is fine, but here's the problem. Our dexterity modifier is +2. We've got proficiency of +2, and it's a shadow. It is probably supposed to have expertise in this. This is one time where I would say give it, if it's going to have any skill, it would be this. Heck, I would even give it perception as a skill, frankly. I would give this expertise. I'm going to make this a 6, not a 4. It should be really good at hiding. And of course, some of its features will make it even better at hiding in the dark. Okay, now, perception. We're going to add in perception. If you were a shadow, you'd be perceptive. So we're going to have some sort of perceptive modifier for this. Okay, so I'm not going to change the wisdom, but I am going to make them skilled in it. So they're going to have the proficiency bonus. All right, so that's that. For those of you who are wondering why I'm doing this in the chat, I have had plenty of time to sit on the toilet and figure out a lot of this stuff in advance. I'll take off my hat. It's getting very hot, and I need a bit of focus. Okay, now, moving down. We've got damage vulnerability. I have no problem with Radiant. It already exists. I think that's Spot on. Yes, absolutely. Do that. There's another problem here, though, that I think we need to consider. I want to come back to resistances because it's a bit of a, I would say, headache, frankly. So first off, damage resistance to cold. I would say that's a no-no. I would take that off. You'll notice in the stat block it already has damage immunities to necrotic and poison, not cold. I think it should be cold as well because it's really a spirit. Cold is probably not going to affect it at all. Okay, so I wouldn't even bother going there. These are things that don't really make any sense. There's another one that I want to sort of change here. I don't want to add anything else. I don't want to add like, you know, thunder damage, or I think necrotic, poison, and cold, and it being essentially immune to those is fine. It's only 3. 3 immunity sounds like a lot, but there's a lot of damage types. Don't worry about that stuff. We're going to give it a lot more damage immunities in a second. You're probably not going to like this. Okay, so now we're looking at other things. I have to say I'm always perplexed by why are we making acid something it's resistant to? Probably because it's more of a what's the word? Apparently it can hurt it, but it's resistant to it, but not immune to it. What? Because it's basically like an incorporeal creature, right? So I guess that's where they're going with this. Fire, I have an issue because see, fire is light, and this thing is vulnerable to radiant, which is basically light. I don't think it should be resistant to fire. The reason being is, I think one of the most efficient ways to deal with a shadow, or should be, is you use radiant damage by being a paladin and you know, using light from your weapon or whatever it is, or calling down a spell that does radiant damage. That makes sense. Light. They even have trouble seeing in light, you know, in daylight. So light's their enemy. So fire is just another form of light. So I would take fire off the damage resistances, because what we want them to, our player characters, to really do is to put oil on the head of their weapon or the blade of their weapon, light it up so it's on fire, and then start slashing away or whacking away at our shade or shadow to destroy it. So fire, I think, should go. Lightning is another thing where, again, lightning has got light. It's electricity, but it's got light involved. I reckon get rid of that as well. I don't think that they would be resistant to that. They won't be immune to it. They won't necessarily be as vulnerable as radiant damage. I don't want to make them vulnerable to fire and lightning. Radiant is fine, but no, it should be able to hurt them. Yep. And then thunder. Thunder I have no issues really with. Acid is a really weird one. I almost feel like giving this monster any kind of damage resistances is kind of silly. Just because it just adds... I hate adding mathematics to a game where it doesn't need to have it there. Do you know what I mean? Okay, so I'm going to come back to this. I'm going to still leave it for a little bit because I'm going to make some more changes to this, but you're not going to like them, so I'm going to wait till the end before I do it. I think a few of you will be very, very annoyed. Okay, next. Condition immunities. I'll go through the condition immunities in a second. Now, let's talk about dark vision. This thing doesn't have eyeballs anymore. Why the heck do we have dark vision? I know it's got 60 feet of dark vision. It should be blind sight. Blind sight. It's not using its eyeballs. It's not using its ears or its nose to detect you. Blind sight. And 60 feet is essentially what the player characters have. No, give it 120 feet. We've been doing this a lot with the monsters that I've been rebuilding. Passive perception is now going to be a 12 because we've got a perception modifier or perception modifier of 2, so add 10. There we go. I think that is much more in line. I don't want to give it true sight, but blind sight is, I think, far more sensible. I have no problems with it not having a language. Okay, now you'll see I've left 2 of these areas still yellow. There's a reason for this. I'll come back to them. Okay, this is going to take a little bit longer to get through. Amorphous. I have almost no problem with the amorphous feature outside of the defining it as the restriction is The shadow can move through a space as narrow as 1 inch wide without squeezing. Bollocks to that. Bollocks. It's a shadow. It is not an ooze, okay? It has no form. The shadow can move through any space, any narrow space without squeezing. We should not be restricting our shadow to the space that it can move through. That means a very small gap it could get through. Okay? So that is a thing as far as I'm concerned. Next, shadow stealth. While in dim light or darkness, the shadow can take the hide action as a bonus action. Now, you'll know how I feel about bonus actions if you've been watching my channel for a while. I think they are garbage. I think they slow down the game. I think they cause player paralysis. I know players who are like crunchy games, like being able to do more and giving them bonus actions themselves, and you think giving a monster a bonus action is also a good thing. We're going to give it a feature that doesn't require a bonus action. It is just going to work all the friggin' time. So none of this having to take the hide action. I don't think that hiding in the middle of combat where you see me, I know it's a thing in 5e, you see me, and then I go down behind into a bush, and I take the hide action, if I can, as a bonus action if I'm a thief, so that you can't see me anymore. It makes no bloomin' sense. Doesn't make any sense with a monster, so let's not do that. While in dim light or darkness, the shadow has advantage on stealth and hiding. That's it. That's what we're doing. We're giving it that. It is not a thing you turn on. It is a passive. It works all the time. Okay? As long as you have these conditions, you get advantage on stealth and on hiding. Okay? You are harder to notice. Right. Sunlight weakness. While in sunlight, the shadow has disadvantage on attack rolls, ability checks, and saving throws. Basically everything under the sun. But ability checks also mean skill checks. Okay? So I have no problems with this feature. It's actually really clean, simple. Love it. Good on you. Well done. Now down to the strength train. It has only one thing that it does. This monster only has one thing that it does, and that's it. And that is the strength train. Now, I looked at the traditionally at some of the older versions of the Shadow, and this makes perfect sense. It actually this is probably how it should work. So what do we got here? Melee weapon attack +4. And you'll see it from my table, since it's a half challenge rating, +4 is where we need to be. One attack, it's the number of attacks we should get at half is 1. For those of you who have noticed challenge rating 1 and you've seen that they get 2 attacks, there's a good reason for that, but I'm not going to explain that today. That's for another day. Okay, next. Our damage output. Is our damage output where it needs to be for this creature? And I would say I've highlighted it as probably not a great place for it to be. I'm not worried about the secondary ability. I'm much more worried about the damage output right now. So let's have a look. It says between 6 and 8. This monster does too much damage. Okay? I honestly think that this monster does way, way, way too much damage. That's not taking into consideration the fact that it basically damages your score, your strength score, and can just about like turn you into a shadow. Like, that's not even taking that in consideration. It's way too high. The range should be between 6 and 8. That's what we should be aiming for. So we're using our dexterity, which is fine. I have no problems with that. But if we want to hit this number between 6 and 8, we're not going to get it done with 2d6 plus 2. So that's got to change. That's got to go down. Okay? So how do we do that? I think the easiest way is to go to the lower end rather than the top end. Now, you're probably wondering, why would you go to the bottom end of that scale? 1, because it's a half challenge rating. And also 2, its additional feature is pretty ruthless. That's pretty ruthless for a half challenge rating monster. And since I'm not changing the challenge rating, that would just confuse you too much. I just need to depower it so it's in line with a half. Okay, so let's deal with that first. I think an 8-sided dice is probably the way to go. So that'd be a 4.5. And then we add the 2 from the dexterity modifier, because we're going to consider this weapon, it's melee attack, uses strength or dexterity. Okay. And it would get us a 6. A 6.5. A 6.5 is right in the money pouch. So we're going to get rid of that. And go 1d8. And make that a 6. And I know a lot of you will be looking at me and saying, Fred, that's ridiculous. You don't make things less powerful, you make them more powerful. This is one of those times where the shadow needs to be a little bit less powerful in terms of damage output. Now, let's have a look at the rest of this feature. Necrotic damage. So you take 6 on average necrotic damage, and the target's strength score is reduced by 1d4. Okay, now that's quite a lot. I'm not going to change it though. I looked traditionally at the monster, what AD&D and early versions did, and it's kind of in line with that. And I am heavily focused on this book, which is Shadow Dark 2 right now. So I've got that in front of me as well, and I was looking at that as well. So we're going to leave that. That still makes this monster really, really nasty for level 1 characters, but it will not kill you outright, because it would take a while to reduce your strength. Even if you reduce it by the maximum of 4, it'd take a little while for most characters to go down. And I have a dim view of players who decide to have a dump stat, and they decide to make strength their dump stat, or any score they have a dump stat if they're using point buy or standard array, and they're not just rolling and having to take whatever they get. Okay, I have a dim view of that. If you do that, you suffer the consequences. Okay, right, now the target dies if this reduces its strength to 0. Again, traditionally this is how the monster has worked. I have no problem with that. Otherwise, the reduction lasts until the target finishes a short or long rest. This I do have an issue with. Again, I am not a fan of the short rest mechanic. I believe the long rest mechanic is fine, but the short rest mechanic is too much. So, otherwise the reduction lasts until the target finishes a long rest. If a non-evil humanoid dies from this attack, a new shadow rises from the corpse 1d4 hours later. Now, it says a non-evil, and I don't think that's where we want to be. I think what we need to do is we need to change this to if a humanoid, it has to be a humanoid, if a humanoid dies from this attack, a new shadow rises from the corpse 1d4 hours later. So whether you're evil or neutral or good or whatever it is or anything in between, it will not matter. As long as you're a humanoid, you die from this thing, you're coming back as a shadow. Okay? So I think that is probably the better way of structuring this. If you are a humanoid and not undead, that would also help. Undead. Okay, no, hang on. Let's do this. This is going to have to work a bit of dice from attack. Then you should rise from. Okay. The strength drain does not affect undead. Affect, not affect undead. Okay, that's the only line that I wanted to put into there. Okay, so now we've got this that I have to work my way through. I'm going to do the condition immunities first, but before I start doing that, I want to go and look at chat to see what you guys have been cooking up and what ideas you've come up with. Be interesting. We'll see how you feel in terms of the changes I've made. Okay, here we go. Just for a second while we have a look what you've got here. Hello, Fred Huber. Fred Huber is a patron. Thank you for being here, Fred. I really do appreciate it. And a moderator. It's all right. If you're late, you're late. That happens. I wouldn't worry about it. It's one of those things. can move through even a keyhole. Exactly. So the gap should be, we don't want to define the gap because it's a shadow. It should be able to move through pretty much anything as long as there's a gap of some kind. Okay. Negative space. Hello, negative space. How are you? Should the shadow be pretty much invisible while in dim light or darkness? Yes, AD&D did this. But it does have red glowing eyes. I guess this is the only thing that's giving it away, which is why I've given it advantage when it's in dim light and darkness to be stealthy or to hide. Okay, that's where I'm going with this, because I don't want to make it full on invisible while it's in darkness, which is kind of what AD&D was trying to do. But being invisible in 5e doesn't really work the way I think it should. The explanation by Jeremy Crawford I have considered to be kind of poor, and then Shadow Dark has sort of approached it very similar in that you have disadvantage. AD&D, older versions, it's been basically you're just downright invisible. But we're dealing with 5e, and I don't want to I don't want to have to try to rewrite the rules for invisibility when most of you are probably doing it the way Jeremy's doing it anyway, or some other version of your own, right? So I don't want to play with that too much. So I structured it that way. There's some mechanics there. It should work fine, and it gives you a bit more versatility. Okay, it's actually quite a much stronger feature for the shadow to sneak up on the player characters, which we should be doing. Dinner time for me. Have a good night and keep up the good work. Okay, thank you. All right, let's get back to the stat block because we need to finish off the rest of this thing. For those of you who can hear banging and crashing and noises, I have builders building a house beside me, and they're using a digger, and it's really hot. So if I leave the doors and windows closed so the noise doesn't come through, they will still shake the house. My house is shaking like a leaf right now. They are bashing the ground, putting the posts in. Literally pounding the ground to put the posts in. All right, so let's have a look at this. Condition immunity. So let's start with this. We need a player's handbook. We'll go through all the conditions to make sure we have found everything that probably should not be included. So first off, no monster should be immune to be unconscious, so we'll leave that alone. Stunned. This is not a solo monster. I have no problems with being able to stun this monster, although being incorporeal, it makes very little sense. But we'll leave stunned alone. Okay. Restrained. If you can't grapple it, restrained makes sense to be there. So we're going to keep restrained. That's fine. Next, prone. Knocking it prone. Prone doesn't make sense because it's a spirit, so that's fine. Poison is on there. I'm fine with that. Petrifying a spirit makes no sense. I'm fine with that. Paralyzing it makes perfect sense to me. Invisibility doesn't apply. That that doesn't come into the ballpark. Incapacitated, no, it should always be able to be incapacitated in some way. Grappled makes sense. Frightening makes sense, and it's also got exhausted, but I think there's a couple of others that need to be here. Okay, I know it's got a lot of condition immunities already, and the really, really strong ones. Like these things are some of the best condition immunities to have on a monster, which means that applying a condition to this monster is probably not going to work very well. Simply having a flaming torch and whacking it, or putting oil on your weapon and lighting it up is probably the most efficient way to deal with it, unless you're using magic of some kind. Okay, right, here we go. It does not have ears. Why can it be deafened? Why can it be blinded? It has got blind sight now. I'm going to add those in as well. Blinded is added. If you look traditionally at the old monsters and how they were built and the shadow was built, so for example, this is Advanced Dungeons and Dragons First Ed Edition. This book is on its way out, by the way. It's very much falling apart. But one of the things that is very interesting is it did state a couple of things that is unaffected by. And if I can take my glasses off and read this tiny, tiny print, It says down here, if bright light is cast, such as continual flame, blah blah, they can't be clearly seen. So something like that. Right now, here we go. Shadows, undetectable, 90%. So they're pretty hard to find. But if we go up a bit, it says here, okay, shadows are not affected by sleep, charm, or hold spells. Now, it just said charm. I'm adding charm. Charmed. I don't think we should have that on there. I think they should be immune to being charmed. You can't charm them. Okay, and I'm going to add deafened because they've got no ears. Deafened. That means it's almost got all of the different conditions. Is that the end of the world? No, it's not. It just means that secondary effects on this monster are probably not going to work because it's a spirit. Okay, you're going to have to find a different avenue. Turn undead is probably the most sensible thing. But anyway, so that is the condition immunities. So I've worked through that. That was easy enough. Next, let's deal with the damage types. Damage types are interesting. I guess one of the things that I have an issue with is the bludgeoning, piercing, and slashing damage from non-magical attacks being a damage resistance. Because this, to me, if you have a look at how spirits tend to work, and I could go back and look at AD&D, but I don't think it's necessary. I believe that this should live there. Let's just put that there. Nope, that's the wrong one. Let's try again. And we're going to add this into the immunities. I hate to say it, people. It needs to live there. Bludgeoning, piercing, and slashing damage from non-magical attacks. It is completely immune to them. Not resistant. You're not going to get anywhere with this. Don't bother. So, there we go. You'll need a magic weapon to use bludgeoning, piercing, and slashing damage. We haven't told the players that fire might be an effective way. They're going to have to grow some brains. If your players are not familiar with this, they're going to die the first time. And maybe the second time. I don't like damage resistances. Those are the only two damage resistances that I could think of that I consider retaining. But then again, I'm not even sure that it's necessary. Do you know what I mean? Thunder, I guess you could say you're trying to blow or blast the thing away. I don't think that it needs to be resistant to thunder damage. Acid damage is like a physical attack. It's kind of like, what's the word? It's like, I guess, bludgeoning, piercing, and slashing damage. For me, acid damage doesn't make sense that it be a resistance. And I don't want to make thunder a damage resistance either. So I'm taking that away. You'll see that the damage resistances are disappearing very, very quickly, by the way. Now we come down to acid. What do I want to do with acid? Do I really feel like in any way, shape, or form, throwing acid at it would affect it? The problem is we also have magical acid damage. But magical acid damage is just creating acid. So it's still acid. It's still a physical attack. So I guess I would say I'm taking the acid and I'm putting it to the damage immunities. I've always said that if you add too many damage immunities to a monster, you are probably going to affect the difficulty of the monster. But it'll make it much more difficult to deal with. But I think it makes sense, even though it is a half challenge rating. Acid. Acid's not going to do it. Why would that have anything to do with it whatsoever? So, this is where I currently sit with regard to how this monster should work. How many different damage types are there in the game? Let's have a think about that. How many damage types are there in 5e? Have we included too many things? Have we left anything out? Do we need to adjust something here? Well, let's have a look at that. Oh, by the way, for those of you wondering about this table, half challenge rating, the DC I would recommend is a DC 12 for making any kind of saving throw, because it's less than a 1 You know, it's less than a challenge rating 1, so it should probably be a little bit lower. Okay, we start to venture into non-combatants once you get under challenge rating 1, as far as I'm concerned, where they're not really that effective. And this table does go all the way to 30, but I'm not even going to explain to you why the 30 is set up the way it is, because most of you haven't played to level 20 and haven't used those monsters, so you wouldn't know what I was talking about anyway, so we'll leave that alone. Okay, so let's have a look at what are the different damage types for 5e. What are the different damage types for D&D 5e? I'm sure this will give me a list. Here we go. Right, so we've dealt with acid. Acid, we've said it's immune to it. Bludgeoning, it's immune to that unless it's magical. Cold, it's immune to that. Fire, it's not immune to fire because it's generating light, and it's not necessarily vulnerable. We could make it vulnerable. Force damage, no, I think force damage is going to do normal damage. Okay, lightning, it's immune to. God, they are really bashing the ground really hard, aren't they? I can feel the whole my microphone, the whole room is shaking. And then you have what was it? What was I looking at before? I was looking at lightning damage. So we said about lightning damage. So it's the wrong table. We were saying that lightning damage should be able to affect it. It's not necessarily vulnerable, but it's not immune to that. Okay. So, and it's not resistant. So that's fine. Okay, we'll leave that. So you've got some options. Use a magic weapon. Okay, that does bludgeoning, piercing, or slashing damage, and at challenge rating half, the player characters probably don't have that, but they do have fire, and some of them will have access to radiant. Okay, then we have things like lightning. Some of them will have access to lightning because there is a thing called shocking grasp, so that's all right, that would work. Force is a damage type they have access to. Magic missile is something. Eldritch blast does that. Necrotic, obviously immune. Piercing we talked about. Poison we talked about. Psychic. Now psychic, if you've got something like vicious mockery, will work because even though it's not vulnerable, it will still do damage. Yep. It's not immune. It's not vulnerable. It will still do something. It's not going to be resistant to that. Okay. So that's another damage type. Radiant, it's vulnerable to. Slashing, and we talked about thunder before. We got rid of thunder as being a resistance, and it is not immune to that as well. It should be affected by that. So how many damage types does a player have access to if we build it the way it is, and they are level 1 and they have no magic items, but some of them might have some spells they can cast? They can use fire. They can use force, they can use lightning, they can use psychic, they can use radiant, they can use thunder. That is 6 different damage types out of how many? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. 13, they've got 6. That's almost half the damage types they still have access to. It's now about figuring out what it is that the monster is going to be vulnerable to, or what will hurt it. And there are plenty of damage types left that will do so. I don't consider this a problem. I consider this a puzzle for the players to figure out. And I think this makes far more sense as a stat block now than it did before. And this is how I would write it up, essentially. I'm going to go to chat before I sign off, but that is the changes. I'm going to put this up onto Patreon, as I always do, probably near the end of the week when I get a chance. And, of course, we'll do another monster next week. But, yeah, let's just have a quick look at what chat has to say. I'm kind of curious as to the opinions that people might have. Yeah, if it's vulnerable to anything, it should be radiant. And I think I would be fine if you changed it, made it vulnerable to lightning and to fire. I think that would be fine because they're all light sources in some way. Do you know what I mean? Radiant is just kind of like radiation. It's intense light. And I think we have established that it being in just normal light is bad. Well, fire is worse than normal light, and lightning's definitely worse than normal light. It's going to hurt, and it's very bright. So I think that's going to probably be fine. let's end this poll. For those of you who are wondering what is going to happen to all these monster stat blocks that I've been making and putting on as singles onto my Patreon, the day will come where I will release it as a PDF. The day will come. It's a long way off, but the day will come. Do you think the shadow stat block for Dungeons & Dragons 5e needs fixing? Undecided, 37%. Yes, 25%. No, 25%. Just watching, 12% out of 8 votes. Okay, cool. That's all good. No problems. Happy with that? I can understand that. That sounds good. Look, whether you think it needs adjusting or not, these are the sorts of changes I would make to make the shadow sort of more in line with the theme of the monster and with the power of the monster. It is still a very dangerous monster, but it will take a few rounds. Like, you know, it would take at least 2 rounds of being hit by the strength drain to kill a character outright. You're doing something terribly wrong, or your group are very inexperienced if this is happening to them, or you're using too many shadows. I think because a half challenge rating monster that this is, a lot of people tend to throw too many at the players. If they're level 1, I would throw 1 shadow at them, maybe 2 if they're really experienced, and that would be it. Okay, 2 halves makes a 1. 1 is in line with the fact that their characters are level 1. Okay, that's probably the best way to think about it. Just because of the output of damage and the effect of their special ability. Okay. Anyway, I'm going to get moving. I'm actually heading off because now that I've done this, I'm not going to finalize that stat block just yet. I'll do that at the end of the week. I've got to go and work on this game. I'm in the process of designing 10 classes for Shadow Dark with Wally DM and AJ Pickett and Mitchell Reed, who is a patron. Yes, so we're working on 10 classes, and all the classes that you would like to see that aren't included in the core book. We're working on these, and a few others that the Commander is an interesting one. And we've got 14 ancestries, which is basically species and races. Those are easy to write and interesting, and AJ's got really wants to make more of them, so that's fine with me. If we get it done, I have a cut-off date, so I better get going, eh? So mid-February. Anyway, I got to get moving. Thank you to everybody who's been watching and listening. I do appreciate it. Thank you so much to everybody who took part in the poll. I want to thank all of my patrons who support me on Patreon. I want to thank those people who watch my live streams and support me by watching the live streams. It really is helpful because, as you notice, my live streams, the number of live streams I'm doing is getting smaller and smaller, and that will continue. So thank you for watching. Again, everything goes to Patreon for now anyway. And wherever you are in the world, whether it be the morning, the afternoon, or the night, please look after yourself, your family, and your friends. Be nice to your neighbours. Hello, Derp. Derp is a patron and a moderator, and also helping me with the Shadow Dark stuff, by the way. Till next time, keep rolling those 20s.